Well, good morning. It's a great honor and pleasure to be with all of you. I want to thank Henry for the kind words of introduction. It's an incredible privilege to join the OC Forum. I don't live that far away. I live a little bit north in Torrance, California. So I'm the southernmost statewide constitutional officer in California. I thought I'd share at the outset a little bit about myself. Henry briefly alluded to it, but I think your background provides a perspective by which you govern, who you are as a person. So as Henry alluded, my parents are immigrants who came to this country. They came in the 1950s, a very different generation of America, America that looked very different, and the issue set that they had to deal with was some similarities, but some contrasts as to what we have today. My dad came to this country with 3 shirts, 2 pairs of pants, about $100 in his pocket. English was his 5th language, and then worked very hard and got his PhD in chemical engineering. My mom also came from Taiwan separately, made similar types of sacrifices. I am the oldest of their 4 children. I stand before you as the failed oldest child, like so many people who come to this country, right? They are a product of their life experiences. So my mom was raised in Taiwan, in Tainan, and that part of Taipei, Taiwan, they used to be tested each year as to which school they would go to. And then to test highest, they would become a surgeon. So my mom wanted 4 surgeons. I have a brother who's a year younger than me. He's an ophthalmologist, so we like to tease him and go, Bob, you got so close, but you screwed up right at the end. And then born in New York, raised in suburban Chicago. Some of you may know my high school classmate, Dave Jones, our state insurance commissioner. And I grew up at a time where there were very few Asians. And so Asians during the early part of that decade represented 0.6% of the American population. And so like so many generations before us, whether it's Italians or Germans or Irish or Latinos or African Americans, we faced some discrimination. And it was very hard. We would have ugly racial epithets spray painted on our garage, go home gook or Jap or chink. Sometimes I laugh about it now because you think they can't even insult you correctly because they can't identify you properly, right? But as a child, it's very painful. It's very painful to be said you're treated as a second-class citizen. It's very hurtful where you're excluded, where, I just wanted to be that normal American kid who wanted to ride bike, who wanted to play baseball. During the winter, I wanted to go sledding. And then, they wouldn't let you be part of us. And just to have to defend your dignity, your integrity. I love my parents and the incredible sacrifices, like so many other Americans, that they made to give us an incredible opportunity, fundamentally what America is about, that I just feel so terrible that, my dad passed away, not getting everything that he wanted, that my mom, and she's proud of it, the struggle, that she had to work so hard just to be treated fairly. Part of that is also part of charity and vision and how you look at each other. My mom is devoutly Catholic, so we had good news earlier this week. My mom had been battling serious health issues. She has recovered. So prior to her health issues, she used to go to church on a daily basis, 6:30 or 8:30 Mass, and she would pray for all of our souls, right? So that's sort of that approach where you give benefit to each other and you wish well for each other, right? So that's the approach and background that I give to governing at the highest levels in the state of California. Mine is one that's inclusive, that you respect each other, right, and everybody's involved in the process. And I've been incredibly fortunate to work with so many positive public and private sector leaders. Suki Chiang is a dear, dear friend. He's invited me to his children's wedding. Suki was at my wedding. Chuck and I went to China together a few years ago with a really extraordinary representative. I wanted to make sure that Orange County is also represented. It's also a different style. I lead on an annual basis delegations to China. And so sometimes as the lead person of those delegations, right, I will review the list to see if we can enhance those particular delegations. So when I got that list earlier this year, there was no representative from Orange County. And I said, we need somebody from Orange County. Then so Fred Miniger was invited, right? I'm a Democrat, but I wanted a Republican also represented, right? Because we want a balance of perspectives and people of faith and different expertise and backgrounds. Because this is an incredibly complex, complicated state. Our issues can be incredibly challenging. We are urban, we are suburban, we are rural, and we need to make sure that we bring responsible, serious leadership to engage in those particular actions so that we can promote and develop and implement serious, forward-thinking, effective policies for each and every single one of us. And so that's what I've tried to do. Now, my work has been focused in the financial offices, and I'm very proud. I'm the only person in California history to have served in all three financial offices. First, the Board of Equalization, the Tax Authority, right? Not all that sexy, but we have to pay for this state, right? Just think 5 years ago, people have forgotten in California. It's amazing how quickly, 5 years ago, we were still in fiscal crisis in California. And it's not until we passed Proposition 30, right, and not everybody agreed, but we owed education $10 billion. We had deferred our education payments by $10 billion. We had 188 school districts educating 3 million of California's 6.25 million kids that were in financial trouble. We can't lose that perspective. And unfortunately, as you see these campaigns, right, it's about who can spend more money, right? And we're all ambitious. We all want to do great things, but we have to be responsible. Else we could easily fall back into the dangerous position California was from 2007 to 2012. And I want to make sure that we don't return to that, right? Jerry Brown brought fiscal discipline in the governor's office to the state of California. Somebody has to sit in that chair and say, yes, we're going to invest in, and that's my top priority, education, because I wouldn't be standing before you but for the sacrifices and the magnet that is education in the United States of America. And so that is going to be my focus, because we know that education is the gateway to prosperity and opportunity and the American dream, right? Without it, we're not going to succeed going forward. And I want to make sure that that world-class education is abundant regardless of the community that you live in. So whether you live in East Palo Alto, or whether you live in Irvine, California, or whether you live in Imperial County, right? Every child, regardless of background, socioeconomic status, will get a world-class education. Because I'm going to drive for making sure that we enhance performance, that we measure student achievement, and that we build the relationships, private sector, public sector, NGOs, wrapped around with the proper social services from public and private, to make sure that child has every opportunity to reach their fullest potential. And then there's Mike and others here. I'm going to continue the work that I have led, right, because I've been the lead as a statewide elected official, and I'm not sure others have worked on it as aggressively, to build more housing, right? Our economic growth is highly dependent on how much more housing we build in this state, right? I cited it as the #1 priority in regards to policy that I was pushing in the Treasurer's office during my inaugural. Just 1 month later, right, and I'm the state official as the state's banker who deals with the ratings agencies. They cited in their February 23rd report that our housing situation has a potentially negative credit to the state of California unless we do something. And then when you listen to economists today, they say, you know, California economy, right, it flattened out a couple months ago, right, but it bumped back up last month, right? It's going to face extraordinary strain unless we build more housing. And so when I talk to CEOs and other business leaders throughout the state of California, when I talk to young folks at Cal State Fullerton or Coast Community College, they say, what are you going to do about housing? So just through the rules that I've updated at one of the housing authorities, I've been able to, in 2 years, enhance financing for new and rehabilitated housing by 80%. I didn't ask for additional money. Well, I did ask for additional money, but not immediately, to make sure that we could enhance California's performance. And then as we go forward, I want this state to continue to be, and this area is, one of the leading economic engines, right? We are the state of innovation, and we are near UC Irvine. When you think about our institutions of higher learning, they are incredible economic growth engines. The research that takes place in technology, in healthcare, in ag research, on so many different fronts, has to be supported by the state. And we know that we haven't done a good enough job to make sure that we continue to provide the foundational support so that our institutions of higher learning are successful. And you think about over the last 4 decades where the state support for the University of California system has dropped from 40% of operating revenues to 11% of operating revenues, right? We have shifted the risk to the next generation. And so I want to make sure that we understand our mission in this state, right? Making sure that we build an economy that provides a better future for every single Californian. And that I want to make sure that we all understand that, like I did when I chose to move to the state of California, I chose to move to the state because I thought it was unmatched in its ability to provide me and others with the best future possible. And for me, it was unquestioned. And so I want that idea being harbored not only amongst Californians, I want that vision and belief held by people throughout the United States of America and the nation and the world, that California is the place to go to get a world-class education, to spawn your business, to have a high-quality standard of living. And then we have to face it, this is going to be challenged, right? We're going to have to challenge, and I want to challenge in the most constructive fashion possible, Washington, D.C., right? Because we have a difference as to our values, right? I celebrate our diversity, right? When you think about the makeup of California, right? Why would you want to build a wall on our southern periphery and not allow Mexicans to come to this country? They're our largest trading partner. Canada's our second largest trading partner. China's our third largest trading partner. For most of the people in this world, when you think about the growth areas of the world, California is the port of entry for those individuals. It gives us the first choice to build success. And so I want to send a clear and powerful signal that California is going to take a different road. And then hopefully Washington, D.C. will understand what we see and what we live, because it's our diversity of opportunities that has made us, despite the fact that we have a lot of work to make this state much more business friendly, made us the most successful economic engine in the United States of America. So I hope all of you share this vision. I know you're working very hard to make Orange County especially prosperous. It's great diversity. And I will promise to make sure that you will be involved in that policy. Orange County leaders have always been part of the guidance of my administration. Before he passed away, and actually nearby in the Segerstrom Auditorium, Essie Adibi from Chapman used to be one of my economic advisors. Right? So I would get granular detail about what's happening about Orange County. Right? That's that commitment to making sure that everybody has a voice in the next gubernatorial administration so that we all can thrive and be prosperous and fulfill our each American dream. So with that, thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, sir. We're going to put it out to questions.
Sure.
If you're ready for that.
And then if I could ask you, some of you have read when I do this, I ask for name and dream.
I'm not sure you want that.
Microwave National Core dream is Dodgers do it in 5 games.
Okay.
It's nice to have you here. I think the affordable housing community has had no better friend than the treasurer.
Thank you.
But to be fair, we've asked the other candidates a question because education is part of your core values. And we've asked a question related to the recent action by the Cal State University system to no longer require the third year of algebra. Algebra 2, most of the parents in the room understand what that is because they're at the dinner table and they're dealing with it. And many of us think that's going the wrong direction, that we have to compete. We wanted to hear your perspective on whether we should be increasing maintaining our standards, particularly in quantitative mathematical fields, or is there a reason you see why we should try to eliminate some of those so people can complete college quicker and at less costly state?
So I think it's throughout the track, right, and just add, so I apologize if you feel that I'm digressing, right? I think we need to go more in and invest more money and resources, being personnel, starting earlier on. So from early childhood education all the way up through the institutions of higher learning. What I would do in regards to the higher learning is have a conversation with the community college leadership, Cal State leadership, and UC leadership to identify an identified funding stream. That's not consistent with what a lot of Wall Street does, but we can't continue to have the fluctuations that we've witnessed for institutions of higher learning. So that 10-year period around that last recession, we increased tuition and fees, or the respective entities, not me. Community college by 130%, Cal State by over 110%, and UC over 110%. Right, so I'd like to get us to that ideal, specifically in regards to your question. We need to do everything we can so that we see that progression. We need to make sure that we're moving people along, but that we hold those standards, right? You don't want to, this is a global economy, right? So we need to have that conversation, right? I know, the various approaches in regards to dropping remedial or trying to incorporating in the class, right? For some of those changes, I want to see how they work. Oftentimes, the mistake that the state makes is they go all in through different jurisdictions, and then oftentimes we build the infrastructure and the bureaucracy, and I'm in government, so I don't use bureaucracy as a pejorative, but I want to make sure that we we'll pilot some of these to see if they're effective or not before we dedicate more resources to making all that work. So that's my approach for, perhaps part of that and some other programs.
Hi, Carolyn Kavecki, the Orange County Taxpayers Association. I've actually been dreaming of starting a third political party in California lately that just focuses on fiscal responsibility and getting rid of regulations. So I think you'd actually be a great candidate for us. I have two questions. The first is that the general fund in California is based on such a volatile tax stream. Have you ever thought about what the perfect revenue structure would look like for California and trying to level that out? And then the second question is, what is your opinion on a split roll property tax system in the state?
So yes, so I thought about it a lot, right? And so I've actually tried to talk about changes that are, I wouldn't say minor or major, but tweeners. So for instance, during the recession, some of you may remember that the legislature passed elective single sales factor. Now, does anybody know what elective single sales factor is? Okay, so right, taxes get really complicated. So corporations can apply a whole bunch of different methodologies, right? So we used to double weight our sales factor, right? So it's a corporation, what sales are in the state versus sales outside of the state, right? We look at your payroll factor, what employees you have in state versus out of state, and we look at your property factor, what properties do you have in state versus out of state, right? So you would use those elements and calculate what your taxes are in state. To make it easier, and some states had moved to those jurisdictions, they did what was called elective single sales factor. You could choose just to look at the sales factor, how much you make in state versus out of state. Now, I would talk to a lot of tax and finance personnel who were Californians, so they said, we like this because it helps us minimize our taxes. But as Californians, it's bad for our financing stream because basically, right, corporations can decide, are they going to try to press for sales or expenses in a different year? So you had this whole tax and finance calculation. That's not the way how you try to grow businesses, right, through doing those things. Now, I was interested, I was thinking, if we pull some of those back, could we perhaps, and it's going to cost the state $3 billion over 3 years, what can we try to do to drive down our nominal corporate tax rate, right? Because California's nominal corporate tax rate is 8.84%. National average, and these are dated numbers, was 6.9%, right? So it's hard to argue just at nominal levels, right? And as governor, I would be arguing for businesses making the case to come into California. It's hard when you start off 2% higher than the national average, or nearly 2% over the national average. So I'm open to those types of conversations, right? But it's hard because you have corporations who've built themselves around that. So for instance, I would go talk to Fox or I'd go talk to Activision, right? And I would talk to some of the Fox personnel. They said, California Fox would love that, but our national would hate it, right? So we don't think we could get it past our national. So if I had our druthers and we were starting all over, right? And we're not gonna start all over, right? Because people have changed their system. It would be 1/3 personal income taxes, right? And then you'd have some corporate in that 1/3 sector. It would be 1/3 sales taxes and 1/3 property taxes. Now we know we've changed because property taxes is a local tax, right? It's not a state tax, right? And so it would change the whole distribution formula for the state. And frankly, right, and so I'm not advocating those massive changes, but frankly, we've created all these small administrative fees, taxes, sewage, all these additional fees because we changed Prop 13. So if we could figure out how to fix that, that would have been helpful. Prop 13, where I would make the change is this. I don't believe that you will have, for instance, the Michael Dell case, where you had the purchase of, they were going to purchase a hotel in Santa Monica, right? So you have the step transactions. I think, if you have a 50% +1 accumulation of those transfers, that you ought to trigger a reassessment. So that's the change I would make. Sorry, that was technical.
But they tried to do that, and the legislature passed a bill that
Yeah.
makes that adjustment.
Yes, I understand. Yeah. Sorry to get so technical, right? But when people, I try to be honest, maybe too detailed in regards to providing answers. So.
I actually had a question of my own. Can you give us a little insight into what you will do with the impending crisis with the purse and store systems?
Yeah, so we know that we have upcoming challenges. Well, we will see. So, right, we have pension systems that are about 67 to 68% funded. What we have with our pension systems is that you have negative cash flow, right, because we've had so many people retiring, so they're drawing with their retirement. We don't have enough people. We have a teacher shortage in this state, so the incoming contributions aren't matching the outcomes, but they are ramping up contributions based on the law that was passed in 2012, the PEPA legislation, Pension Reform Act from a few years ago. So we're going to have to make sure that we keep track because it's going to be tough for this decade, right? It's supposed to balance out, right, where we start cutting into the unfunded liability next decade and then, right, catch up by 2046. So we have to obviously take action immediately if we see that our performance is significantly under, so that we increase. A huge determinant of how much action we can take will depend on what the California Supreme Court decides, right? Because you have the Marin cases as to the California rule. And so depending on what is provided in that case, right, it will be deliberated in collective bargaining, and we will see, what actions, what range of opportunities we have in the event that there is an additional shortfall.
My name is Mike Meyer, and my dream right this second is that the federal government tax rules don't overly punish California.
Yes.
And so the specific question would be, you started to answer it, but if they do in fact disallow state income taxes, but they continue to allow property taxes, maybe other type of state or local taxes, can you think of some creative way that we can switch, reduce our income tax, but come up with some tax that will be deductible?
Yeah, so that would be the big grand compromise that takes place in this state, right? You'd have to bring everybody to the table and figure out, what they're willing to shift to. And part of it is this would also require, if you involve property taxes, measures going to the ballot, right? Because it is it's a constitutional challenge. So part of this would be, what would be included, what would be excluded, conversations as to, are we going to use the same formula that we have today, right? Because we created this whole backfill after the passage of Proposition 13. Instead of a lot of those monies being kept local, right? You would get education. There are things such as what is called basic aid school districts, where they raise sufficient property taxes to pay for that school district, and for communities that have lower property values and thus collect lower revenues, right? The state backfills those particular school districts. So we will be, I would encourage, I would lead those conversations, because we want to make sure that we try to keep effectively, at the end of the day, the most amount of money here in California. And for those of you who aren't familiar, right, the latest iteration of what's happening in Washington, D.C. is that we know that there had been discussions for the past couple of months where the federal government was looking at eliminating the deductibility of state and local taxes from your federal schedule. And so the Republicans from higher tax states, wealthier states, such as New York, California, Illinois, said they weren't going to vote for the president's plan or the Republican leadership's plan. And so that would have substantially closed the margin, and it would be uncertain whether the tax measures would pass. So the compromise that they're putting forward is that you could, as you pointed out, being able to deduct your property taxes, but not deduct either your income taxes or sales taxes. Not all states have income taxes. I think it's still 5 states that don't have income taxes. Some states do have sales taxes or don't have sales taxes, right? So different states will allow you to deduct different things. So that's sort of the basis of the question for those who didn't understand what's happening from a tax perspective.
And this will be our last question.
Jerry Harrington, dreaming of a happy future for all. What is your position on the Senate-sponsored socialized state medicine that was passed early in the year?
So the SB 562 is the single payer legislation. So I support in concept single payer. Now, there's a back half of it, right, because they've brought in a lot of different concepts into SB 562. So, and frankly, just the discussion of single payer isn't clear, right, because many nations have single payer, but they're not the same, right? We have single payer, we have Medicare, but our Medicare uses also insurance plans, right? There are other places that have single payer and they don't use insurance plans. So it's not even clear with our SB 562 what that looks like. My parents are from Taiwan, so they have single payer, right? You have single payer sort of in Canada, but then you can also buy additional insurance, which technically doesn't make it single payer. Right? Our VA system is single payer. So we have a whole bunch of single payers. So part of that is we need to decide what single payer looks like. Part of what makes the plan in Sacramento, because it's undefined fully, is universal health coverage. So I support universal health coverage, right? Because I think it drops the costs in the systems. But we have to decide. What's uncertain is how much we're going to cover. So as I mentioned, my mom just recovered from a serious health issue, right? She was prescribed meds that were very expensive. It was questionable whether Medicare covered or not, right? It's still to be determined. Fortunately, my brother's a doctor and he makes decent money, so he can make up the difference. We'll all make that to cover the difference, right? So part of that is it would have been easy on my family if it covered it, right? But understanding that, right, we can't cover everything, right? Because it will break the system. So when we've had the debates, I said we need to have an honest accounting as to what that single payer looks like, because it does drive down costs. Are we using it strictly one, or are we going to use multiple single payers? Are we going to involve insurance companies? What does our healthcare coverage look like? Is it going to be healthcare coverage such as that covered by Medicare? Are we going to be more expansive and cover more services, or are we going to be less expansive? We're going to have more restricted services. So my position is we need to do a lot more work so that we can be honest and transparent with everybody as to what we're going to cover, how much it's going to cost, and what the best systems are in place. And what's also not being covered is that even though if we put those systems in place, we still have weaknesses in our healthcare systems that aren't addressed because people are just using terms such as single payer and universal health coverage, right? People are getting the two confused. So for instance, I just visited Rio Vista area, it's up in Solano County, and they don't have a doctor in their community, right? So or you have a whole bunch of hospitals all providing cardiac services, right? And so we have facilities costs that people have to cover. So we have to think about, what's the most effective way for delivery of healthcare, what are proper efficiencies, and then what's good value-based and transparency. So as we have this conversation, and we have to have this conversation, I would push it as governor, because it's our second leading expenditure, and we all know, because we're all living it, we're all getting older. And as we witness with the federal government and with the state of California, our healthcare costs are increasing. So if we don't address this and understand how we plan for our future, we're going to have massive budgetary concerns. We already have massive budgetary concerns in the healthcare space.
Give a
Thanks,
big
sir.
round of applause.